Hello everybody, today on the channel a story of automotive love and why this 25-year-old faded red Vauxhall Astra van is worth more to me than any supercar I could ever imagine. Now, the simple answer to this, of course, is sentimental value. You see, Ferraris, Porsches, Lamborghinis, Maseratis, BMW, Mercedes, they're all lovely things, but they are also just made of money. And though that may initially sound like a very flippant and elitist comment, it is true. Those cars are very nice, and if anything happened to them, I'd be very, very upset. But this is made of memories. Its financial value is almost zero, but if anything were to happen to this, it is truly irreplaceable. But you've never actually even seen this on the channel before, and I'm not sure I've actually even spoken about it. So what is it, and why does it mean quite so much to me? Once upon a time, these were a fairly common sight on the roads of Britain, and what we have here is a T-Reg 1999 Vauxhall Astra van, which is very much a Vauxhall Astra estate, but in the back, rather than windows and seats, you have flat sides and a storage area. In its day, what made this remarkable is the fact that up front it does feel very much like an ordinary, if low-spec, Vauxhall Astra car, and to drive, it is pretty decent. This one is an LS. Well, actually, that side is an LS. This side is now just an S. On the back, it also says DL, but that, I believe, refers to the engine, which you will find, of course, up here, driving the front wheels. And it is, I believe, a 2-litre, certainly with a turbo. Initially, I thought without, but it does have one, only a small one, mind. However, the power figure, I haven't managed to work out. I thought it was 82 horsepower, but I think that is for the naturally aspirated version. So if anybody out there knows these a little better than I, please do help me. Trying to do research on 25-year-old vans is not easy. For a van of the time, it is also very well specified, having disc brakes all around, power steering, ABS, electric windows, and even air conditioning. It cost its first owner some £17,000. And that first owner, my granddad. And in case you were wondering, yes, this is the same grandfather whose Triton motorbike I now have. He rode that as a teenager, but by the time I'd come along, it was very much an ornament in the garage. And the first time I saw it moving was after I'd had it restored. This, though, is a very different story. You see, my granddad, who I only ever called that, but to everybody else was Mick, was a mechanic. And Grandad always had, as far as I could remember, a red Vauxhall Astra van. Over the years, he also had various other cars. When I was very little, he apparently had a Cavalier. He also had an Opel Manta. Later, he had a Toyota Celica, which I only remember very vaguely because he was very precious about it. He'd taken it on holiday once and somebody had tried to break into it. The lock was still a little chewed up from the screwdriver they used. In order to stop them having gotten away with it, he actually had already fitted a few hidden cutoff switches into it. Apparently he did this to everything that he owned because back then car theft was far more common. Now, my main memory of that car is actually the gear lever, because it was an automatic and it had a button that said overdrive, which to my 6 or 7-year-old brain sounded very, very exciting. Imagine my disappointment when years later I found out what that button actually did. Now, as far as I can remember, this was a 5th generation Celica, red with the pop-up headlights, the last of the pop-ups, but it didn't get used all that often. I have more fond memories of the Jeep Grand Cherokee that he bought in 1997, ostensibly so that his mother could get in and out of it much easier than his other cars, but unfortunately she didn't live long enough to be able to enjoy it. We did though, and we took it on a number of different trips away, including most memorably to Denmark, where we had a fantastic holiday with me, my sister, my nan and Grandad. We went to Legoland, where I think we had a very good time. I believe we got stuck in a maze, but I did make up for that by doing very well on their driving test that they do there for the little kiddies. And so the Jeep I always really quite liked. But if you were to ask me what car it is that I associate with my childhood, it's got to be Grandad's red van. And he used it for just about everything, not only going to and from work, but also going out to visit customers who'd got themselves stuck. I, in fact, when going through some of his things, found a set of Slim Jims that he used to help customers who'd locked their keys in their car. Back then, much easier to do. He also used it for gardening and tip runs, and perhaps most worryingly, ferrying my sister and I about. And there are just the 2 seats in this van, and it was the same for its predecessor. I spent a lot of my childhood, not up here, but in fact, back here. We were educated that if a policeman were to appear anywhere, we had to duck so Grandad didn't get in trouble. And nobody really thought there was anything unusual about that. Looking back, if we'd had an accident, that would have been awfully, awfully bad. And I'm amazed neither of my parents ever thought anything was wrong with what Grandad did. But it was the 90s, and I guess children were a little more expendable than they are today. Mind you, I also have many fond memories of using the garage as a playground. So my favourite toys included the pit, which is what you might imagine, a sort of 15-foot long, 6-foot deep trench, and I'd jump over that. I also liked to roll tyres around the place, and maybe my favourite thing of all was hoisting myself up on the 2-post ramp. And the safety feature there was that once I got about that high, I couldn't reach the controls anymore, so I couldn't really do myself too much of a mischief. I also spent a lot of time helping Grandad when he was welding by, you know, blocking out the light, but just making sure that the car didn't catch on fire. I'm still terrified by the noise the tyre machine made though, as it popped a tyre off the rim. That was the stuff of nightmares, honestly. But it has to be said that I absolutely loved Grandad's van. Maybe if for no other reason than spending time in the van meant spending time with Nan and Grandad. And Grandad was the sort of person that would always feed the inquisitive nature of a child. Him being a mechanic and me being a young boy, I was always interested in cars. And I'd always ask him questions about, "Oh, Grandad, what is fuel injection?" Because he'd been moaning about working on somebody's fuel injection system that day. And he'd explain it. And I'd say, "Okay, well, what's special about it?" Then he'd explain carburetors. Then he'd explain red lines on engines and what happens if you go past them and why something bad happens and why it is so bad. He was a really brilliant person. He never had children of his own. Instead, he had my sister and I, because he wasn't my biological grandfather, but still, he was the best Grandad anyone could have ever had. In 1999, he decided time had come to replace the old Astra van, the F-Reg, and so, being a creature of habit, he ordered a new one, supplied brand spanking on the 1st of March 1999 by Quest Motors of Braintree. It was, as far as my memory tells me, exactly the same as the old one. And I was very excited to go out in it, and Grandad being Grandad, he simply put it to use as soon as he got it. Unfortunately, just over a month later, on the 4th of April 1999, he was killed in a motorcycle accident. It is very fair to say that for all of my family, our lives changed that day. But, as is often the case when these things happen and somebody significant leaves you, you then tend to find out that in so many ways they're still there. And now, 25 years later, I'm still finding things that either remind me about Grandad or maybe teach me a little bit about him. Because you see, I was just 9 when he died, and so I never got to know him as an adult. And that still makes me sad, because I know we would have had an absolute riot together, traveling around, learning about cars. Maybe he would have been involved in the channel. Who knows? And you know what? It doesn't actually even matter that when I think of Grandad and his red Astra van, it's probably not this one that I'm remembering. Instead, his old one, and my mind has just sort of conflated the two. Shortly after he'd passed away, the other one went away, and so as far as I was concerned, this was the one and only Astra van that he'd ever had. But the fact is, this is significant for so much more. You see, after he had moved on, Nan then took over running it, and she used it more or less as he had, only driven, I think, slightly worse. It has over the years acquired a few dents and battle scars in various places, although it has, as far as I'm aware, never been painted. So if you were thinking that the car's had a new bumper, a new boot, or for whatever reason, a new one of these, or a fuel cap, you'd be wrong. This is just a quirk of old Vauxhall red paint. And I have a suspicion that maybe these bits are the same as on a car, and then this stuff is painted, well, for a van. I'm not sure there was ever even lacquer on here. People have told me they think they can restore it and get it looking good, and if you think you could do that, well, please drop me a line, because what's the harm in trying? Anyway, Nan then continued to use the van, take us different places. She went on holiday, continued to use it for tip runs, so on and so forth. But maybe most significantly, when I was then learning to drive in 2006, she said that if I got my license, she would insure me on this. And true to her word, she did. A couple of days after I passed my test, which might have actually been New Year's Day 2007, she rocked up and dropped the van off. I then proceeded to use it as much as I possibly could over the next month, taking it to school, going out to the weekends, taking my mates out, took my girlfriend out for a meal. I learned an awful lot about driving, what to do, what not to do, had a couple of scary moments and luckily got away with all of them. This was also the era before everybody had a camera on their phone, well, at least a good one anyway. And so in many ways, this van was a core part of my formative years of driving, and I always remembered it very, very fondly. Nan then kept it, continued driving it, although it is fair to say that her driving never really improved. And it eventually got to the point where we sort of tried to persuade her to not use the van unless she absolutely had to. The Jeep also went and was replaced by her Vauxhall Mocha, which you have seen on the channel, and she was much happier driving that, as were we. And so the van really was sort of semi-retired. Even so, it still went back to the same Vauxhall dealership that she'd been using for 20 years to get its service, and it was even most recently MOT'd by Granddad's old apprentice. But why is it finally here? Well, a few years back, Nan decided that maybe it was time to move the van on, and with her driving ability as it was, we kind of agreed. The plan was to give it to the person that had been maintaining it at the garage. But when we offered it to him, because he'd said for so long how much he liked it, he said actually he didn't have the space for it and couldn't afford to insure it. Not then wanting it to go anywhere else, I said that I'd have it. And at the time, I just put it in storage, still had it MOT'd every now and again, but didn't really think all that much more of it. Then, last year, we lost Nan, but the van really wasn't even something that I thought about. Until earlier this year, and a good friend of mine, Chris, said, "James, I've always wanted to go to the Festival of the Unexceptional." And I said, yes, I've always wanted to go to that too. Problem is, this is a terrible problem to have, I don't think I really have many cars that I'd consider unexceptional. The Ferraris, I'm fairly confident, don't count. The Astons certainly don't, and they're too new anyway. The S2000 is also too new, and I think not unexceptional. The Celica GT4, also same thing. It's not too new, but it is, I think, an exceptional car. And maybe the only one that I'd have would be the Citroen BX. But that's also the 16-valve GTI, which I consider to be quite an exceptional car, and it's also still currently off the road. And so I thought, well, we don't really have anything. Well, except maybe the van. And I thought, yeah, why not? Let's get it out of storage, get it MOT'd, and take this. So that's what we're doing. This weekend, we are headed off to the Festival of the Unexceptional's 10th anniversary, which, depending on when you watch this, may likely have already happened. So, yeah. I really don't know what people are going to think of it. I've printed a big poster to basically tell the story that I've just told you, and I'm now wondering what exactly the next step with this is. It needs a service, it needs new tyres. I've already organised getting those sorted. The ones in the back, incidentally, are not they're other ones I need to get rid of. It's handy having a van. And I do want to tend to a few other little pieces. I want to restore the radio back to the original spec. I've already bought one of those. And it's probably going to go back into storage soon, but if there is somebody out there that thinks they can help me with it and restore it to its sort of former glory, I don't want to do anything too radical. I'd just like to get this paintwork sorted. Yeah, drop me a line. But regardless, I hope you've enjoyed today's slightly different and somewhat offbeat episode. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.